Hey, good evening.
Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out the future for smarter buildings. Great to have you here with the group. We are listed on mondaylive.org in case you're wondering who we are. And just an important point to note that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind. And let's use the Zoom chat to make this as interactive as possible. It's always greater when it's like that. This slide deck is available on mondaylive.org. If you want any of the information on it, so get over there. So this being a new month, we're going to be talking about operational technology, OT, in February, and there's sort of a rationale behind this that we'll explore today. Our agenda specifically for today, our normal chit chat, and then talk about OT, but really sort of asking the question, what exactly is OT? We've used it in the context of it's very similar to BAS, and it's very different to IT. But what is it exactly? Hopefully some interesting discussions there. But before that, hand it over to Ken. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. We've just returned from Chicago. Very busy, grateful event for us. It was amazing to meet everybody face to face because I hadn't been out to an event like that for probably nigh on 3 years. So it was great that everybody still recognized who I was, and traveling with this tall blonde helped a lot, I think. But we basically got our message out to the industry that Jane and I have transitioned to a editorial board that includes Kerry and Brad and Scott Cochran. And to try and explain what that's all about, we actually created a video. So if you click on that slide, you'll actually get to see the video and understand who we are, which was kind of an interesting exercise. I've been running it for 25 years, and as I made the video, it was like, oh, we do that, we do this. Yeah, good stuff. Kerry's going to go to Realcomm. We're just negotiating the details of that now. So that's again a continuance of what we've been doing. I was pleased to be part of the BAS Manufacturers Roundtable. I got onto that one, and not being a manufacturer, I was pleased to be on it, and I was able to give some of my thoughts as to where this might go in the future, and I think that was relatively well received. So it's probably worthwhile giving that a listen to. We also, on the bottom, still have these the sessions that were the winners, I guess, the ones that had the greatest crowds at the bottom. The Cloud Native was a good one, and the one Tracy headed up was a super one. The videos are online yet. I don't think the video for the AI one is online yet, but all of the other ones are. And they're accessible through our agenda. So what we've done is we've taken our agenda, and if you go sort of back to the show and choose what topic you want to look at, you'll actually see that the YouTube has been added. And I'm very pleased with the YouTubes this year. They're extremely better than they were last year. We were just using a laptop to record them. And this year we had a proper camera, and more important, we had a proper sound system. So a lot better. Smarter Summit has got their full video online. I think Anto's going to talk about that a little bit later. So we're really pleased to be back in business, and not that we ever really went out of business, but it kind of looked like that when I was the last man standing. So I think we've now got a team that can carry us into the future. Back to you, Anto.
Great, thank you, Ken. Thanks. Looks like good progress. So a couple of things on my side. On the left is a blog that I've been following for a few years now. It's from A16Z, which is the Andreessen Horowitz company. It's a VC in Silicon Valley. And they are doing a lot of work on trying to figure out the next iteration of the internet, often called Web3. And a lot of this is about obviously blockchain and things of that nature. But it's just sort of interesting watching the progression of that work as people are trying to figure out what is going to happen to the internet. As we in this industry are trying to figure out how best to use the internet as it is now. So I think it's good to keep an eye out on where it's ultimately going to go. So it's interesting. It's obviously a lot of the technologies they're talking about are very complex. A lot of it's to do with finances and the economic side of things. But it's just very interesting. And the sort of the notion of this whole thing is that internet started as being a permissionless system where anybody can do anything. And then about 20 years ago, it sort of changed where the internet is effectively owned or controlled by permissioned organizations, namely the big tech companies. So this is an effort to see what could happen the other side. So interesting stuff. And on the right, on our topic of the day, operational technology, I just did a bit of a sort of a research in terms of whether it itself is something that people talk about, and it is. And this is actually a market research report on it, which looks kind of interesting. I didn't really dig into it, nor am I endorsing it or anything. It's just kind of interesting to see it there. So these are kind of the two different perspectives. The Smarter Summit, as Ken said, the next one's going to be in Tampa at RILCOM and IBCon, and the summit for the video of the AHR summit is now online at this link here. And I'll post the link as we start the chat of this of the show. So all of that's there, 2 hours, 45 minutes of it, and it's sort of chopped up into chapters so you can jump around quite easily. So interesting to watch that. The normal links that we always show, that's been updated, a couple of things here. And that's basically my bits. Anybody want to add any new thoughts, anything, any new perspectives?
Just a quick one. I noticed on LinkedIn there's a bit of a chat going on about the value of the sort of green quadrant values and things, where there's one just recently where I think it might be Vedantics or someone's posted one, and kind of all the big four are all up in the top right hand corner, and against all sorts of different oppositions. And I think the question is sort of the value of some of these things, and is that really true? Could be. I'm not saying it isn't, but in some they're up against CBRE, and other people, other places they're up against different people, and I guess it's trying to find out how independent some of these surveys really are.
So I saw something fly by my LinkedIn. This is a quadrant matrix that Verdantics did, and they put they created a quadrant that is what? What is the quadrant?
It was on all sorts of different things: IoT, energy management software, all sorts of things. And the big four were all up in the top right-hand corner, right? Which
in the good spot.
Top players, innovative, the best of, and stuff. And I have no doubt they have some great software, but some of the other stuff that's out there probably is equally as good. But it kind of, you just worry about whether they're how much influence some of these guys have got over what these reports or kind of these quadrants and things show on the value of them. For me, kind of devalued it a little bit, because a lot of the players that you thought might have been in there are not in there.
Mm-hmm. which is the point of it, right? It's
Exactly.
the research. So be careful, and that's why I kind of put a little caveat on the research that I was referring to. I don't know how good these things are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. If there's nothing else, let us move on to OT. So the sort of the initial question is, what exactly is OT? And the reason of putting this up is that we have a planning call for Monday Live every Wednesday. So we had one of these calls last Wednesday, and we were talking about what we were going to cover in February. And the focus sort of what we wanted to cover in February was the operational issues of buildings. And this has been a sort of a theme that's been going on for the last couple of years, sort of moving from the CapEx side of looking at things from a business perspective to the OpEx side of things, focusing on the operational side of it. And we were sort of talking about that, and we said we're going to we'll sort of dig into this in February. So I kind of left that after that call, just sort of thinking about it, and I thought we have this term called OT, and it actually means operational technology, right? So it's kind of there, it's in the name. So isn't that basically what we do? So that became sort of my question. And I spent a little bit of time, this isn't very scientific, but I tried to sort of think about comparing BAS and OT. I was trying to do it on the Smarter Stack. And really, they're very similar in terms of what they do, the purpose, and how they actually go about things. The one thing that's very different is obviously in the BAS stuff, we typically talk about humans as being and the occupants of a building as being the thing that we're delivering comfort and safety to. Whereas in the OT side of things, which is typically used for industrial processes, is really about the process of what happens in the facility. Right. And I was actually sort of saying, well, managing humans is an industrial process of sort. Right. It's very different. We're all humans, so we're sensitive to that, but it's actually not a million miles away. And I was then sort of comparing the more traditional thinking about OT and IT, and there obviously there's sort of some very glaring differences that we'll know about. But the similarities, the commonalities are actually a lot there. In terms of business objectives and how its operation, how it gets used, ultimately it's about the business objective of that establishment, that facility, and the need for collaborations come out very frequently now as an important thing, and the convergence is there, and the cybersecurity concerns are there. So, sort of the question that I kind of want to put to the group is that isn't that what we should be focusing on, to be the O part of OT? Thoughts?
Well, just to chip in, and so I guess the OT bit is we're there with the functional part. To me, IT is the soft side, and OT is that anything operational, whether it's the lifts, the lighting, the security, anything that's functional and hard is OT. So we certainly sit under that and should be the people who are, if we are operationally running things in the building, and it's just a different way of accessing, the data that's available and what it gets useful when it's moved off-prem.
So
Did I get?
go ahead.
I was just going to say that the difference that I sort of see is that I agree with you, Roger, but the difference is that when we think about OT, certainly when I hear the term, I always think of industrial processes, right? So it's really about the process. And when we compare it in the past, all right, we always say things like, well, the process in the sort of the conveyor belt of a manufacturing plant is critical because it is what that plant produces. And therefore, it's very difficult to compare that to what we do in BAS. But if we think about what actually happens in the building as a process of people moving around, learning stuff, if it's a school, eating, if it's a restaurant, whatever it is, that's actually a process not a million miles away from the process of manufacturing whatever. Am I out of bounds here?
No?
No.
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 I think it's kind of a natural evolution in our industry to start, as much as anything, changing the way that we think about this stuff, right? That same kind of evolution has happened in software development, for instance, the way that big platforms used to be created, big monolithic applications, and then there were cloud-hosted applications. But now on the software side of things, when you have a cloud application, you think of it much more as DevOps, right? And it's a continuous improvement sort of a thing in terms of evolving the platform moving forward. So it makes perfect sense as we move more and more to cloud native kinds of architectures and buildings that our thinking follows suit with that in terms of how we evolve systems and continue to improve them over time. Goes hand in hand with the ever so slowly evolution to a SaaS model in our space. So it all of those things kind of align, I think, business-wise, technology-wise. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, so much sense to me that I always thought that building automation was under operational technology. I never thought of it any differently. But I still think that the most interesting thing for our industry is that the past of our industry is basically as an outgrowth of construction, not operation. So everything has been done and optimized. All the business mechanisms are all about construction. And it's that transition that Tracy's talking about that's going to get us hopefully to these SaaS models and other things where people are actually focused on operating costs and operating dollars, which everyone on the call knows are completely dominant when compared to the construction costs. But we're still an industry that's largely stuck in the construction cost model along the way.
So,
Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
yeah, I got quite a few points to bring up here. So when I was primarily doing my security thing the past few years, and you're looking for cybersecurity risks in facilities, you have to look at all of the different systems that comprise OT. And that's how we describe the assessment process. OT, operational, meant anything digital that had to do with the operation of the building. Lights, building automation, parking systems, video surveillance, access control. And so those are the typicals, 4, 5, 6 type of systems that could be declared OT. But that has been expanding substantially. I know of a project that has 20 different OT systems in it of different types. So it's only getting more complicated, not less. And when you are doing an assessment from a cybersecurity perspective, you got to look at all of that. If you're doing your job, let's put it that way, because any one of those systems can represent a risk to the owner and to the tenants if you're failing to pay attention to it. But the thing I want to point out from Jim, to your point regarding construction versus operational, is some of these silo systems, like fire and safety as an example, okay, they have been successful. I don't know if it was planned this way, but when you put a fire system in, you have to have it inspected regularly. So every fire safety company earns revenue every year from a service standpoint to go in and inspect and make sure the system is fully operational. You put in an access control system. Somebody has to manage the people who use that system, right? So there's an ongoing cost there. And we can keep, elevators. Again, you need to have the elevators inspected regularly. So these other silos have managed to create a service component that is now in the budgets of the building owner, whether they like it or not. Okay. Building automation, we've managed to largely put ourselves in a situation where we're called in on a break-fix basis. So there's no line item in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases for maintaining, and not just maintaining the system, but optimizing the system. The concept of optimizing is so rare. And Jim, I know you know that from the analytics point of view, you go through all kinds of effort to try to show people how they could optimize their system, and then they still don't do it, right?
Right.
But I know there are certain independents as well as branch organizations that actually do a very good job of getting meaningful service agreements on their building automation system. So this is not just a universal problem. It's also a problem of how to convince an owner that service is a good thing, and having an under service agreement is a practical thing. But I would say overall, and I really mean this overall, 90% of the systems aren't being operated in that fashion. So yes, are we failing to put together a service model inherent in, you buy a building automation system, comes with it as a service model. Going to subscriptions, who's that helping? It's helping the software vendor. It does not do anything for the systems integrator, or the branch office, or the person who put the system in, other than having to go collect the money. Where do they get their piece to make the system more operationally effective?
I think that analytics gives us a whole way to change that model, Steve. And I think
I agree completely, right? I agree completely. But that's so I feel like we're coming back to the same challenge we've talked about in the past on the analytics piece, which is how to make that an expectation and a normal part of when you buy building automation, you're going to buy analytics with it. And part of what you're getting is not just the technology, but you're getting the brain power, the manpower behind it to make it useful.
what I say you're getting is transparency, Steve.
Yeah.
So instead of, to the building owner now, everything's opaque, it's black box. They can't see what's going on. What analytics allows them to do is level that playing field through information. So on an issue by issue basis, with financial metrics, they can make decisions on what they want to fix and what they don't. So it's really enterprise management for building operations that we've been heading towards for a long time. I want to bring up two really interesting points, because you mentioned security and fire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, elevators and fire.
Yeah.
Those are very heavily regulated industries.
Right.
And I'm not always a fan of more regulation, but there are cases where government regulation works.
Mm-hmm.
And, frankly, when people complain about paying their taxes, I say, I like living in a country where when your house catches on fire, somebody comes over to put it out.
Yeah.
And when there's some crime in your neighborhood, somebody comes by to do it. And I own a building, and keeping the fire alarm working is a pain in the ass, but I see why I have to pay, and I see why it's inspected, and the elevator too. I don't want anybody getting stuck in my elevator. So these things are what they are. And what you're seeing on the energy and mechanical side is potential local regulation coming on a city by city basis to basically put guardrails around how we're going to run these buildings from an HVAC and energy standpoint. And once again, analytics is the key here, because we can put some real transparency in, not some mushy, greenwashing stuff that we've had over the years, where the bicycle rack gets the same credit as an energy efficient boiler, but something with transparent metrics. And things like ISO 50001, other processes like that will give us those metrics that could be used in regulatory enforcement locally to move the needle on these other areas.
A couple of things on that, Jim. I mean, obviously, I think people recognize with elevators and with fire, these are life safety things. If people get hot or cold, they complain. They whinge, or they get annoyed about it and stuff. And it's not until it really becomes an issue, unless it's in a data center or somewhere else, of course, which makes a big difference. So I guess it's trying to elevate the importance of the environment people are in, including, you know, the air quality and all the other things that need to be maintained. But also I'd argue against, you know, in some things that Steve said, is there's a big barrier or difference between when analytics can be used, you know, it has no value. It has to be installed during the construction phase. But there's nobody in the building. It's not occupied, and you don't even know perhaps who's going to occupy the building afterwards. So it might have different requirements. So, you know, whilst the REITs might actually put in a system that could, you know, do analytics, could do all sorts of things. It's not until the building's occupied, and of course, the SI has almost walked away from the building then, because they tend to have a mentality of construction rather than the opportunity of the business afterwards. And then kind of maybe the FMs get in who pay lip service to some of this stuff. And so I just think, a little bit like you said, there's got to be a mental change to the way buildings go, right from construction all the way through to the whole life of the building.
Yeah, I think, but you know, the pandemic has been very helpful to us there, Roger, because all the people that have been prosecuting that model of real estate investment trusts and office space,
Yeah.
half of them are on their way to going the way of the dodo bird. And as that business collapses in on itself, I think that the change in use of the real estate will change the business model so that we don't have buildings being built as much on spec anymore for people to rent for offices, because that model is not going away, but it's going to be a fraction of what it used to be. And that allows the use of the real estate to change, which maybe allows the mentality to change with it.
I'd like to butt in right here
Unless the
because
hybrid model moves in and there's more general purpose buildings where people have very, very short-term use of the buildings.
Right. Ken, I think, sorry. Go ahead.
I'd like to butt in because my journey to all of this is completely different, because I made my whole career was fixing those broken new construction buildings. And I always came at it from an operations point of view. In 1975, when we built the first EDC system, it had a historian because we needed data. And we had the support, and we replaced failed systems. And then as we grew, we invented the operator control language. We put the power of all of this into the operators, so that operations was always what we were pushing and always what we were fixing. And we understood that the construction process was broken. And that in fact, at part of our career with the BCBC Corporation, we actually stopped the controls and removed them from the project, and we handled them as a prime cost. And then we controlled how that system was put in, because our observation was that they were putting in at least 3- and 5-year-old systems because of the specification things. So I've always come at this the other way. So I know no other world than an operating. The other thing is we actually renamed the whole industry. We called it the client comfort industry. It's not the temperature control industry. It's not the energy conservation industry. It's client comfort. That's our job number one. So I think it's kind of a perspective. I've made a great career out of fixing those broken buildings that construction created. And that's because they were not created for operations. And if you can get the ear of the people who do the operations, it is just a natural. OT just grows out of need.
And yet, you guys know, I look at and I listen to language and the words people use, right? If we sort of ask this group what industry we're in, we're probably going to get building automation industry as being one of the answers, one of the top answers, right? In fact, so much so that Ken has a site called Automated Buildings, right? What is it about? It's all about building automation, right? So the word building automation is basically promising the automation of the building. Right? It's actually subtly different to actually saying we're operating the building, right? And it's almost sort of promising that it doesn't need to be operated. It's going to be automated. And I just sort of wonder how much of that is just because of the mindset that you're speaking about, Ken, is right. And yet we still call ourselves building automation and controls.
And we didn't call it the control language that was operating inside. We called it the operator control language, because it gave the operator the power to do anything that he was unable to do in the past. And I'm seeing exactly that same thing happening in cloud native. And your IBB sort of heads in that direction too, as it empowers these people. So there's a crossing across the floor, and the sophisticated owners will support this. And it'll happen in pockets where there's the kind of people that can make it happen. But at one point we would have 85 operators in a room, training them on basically operator control language. In fact, I was almost at the point that we'd gone too far, as we basically put too much control into their hands. But when you had a diverse portfolio like we did, that was 750 buildings across something that would take you 2 days to drive across, it became useful for sure. Anyway, I think the operators can drive it once they get information, once they get analytical information. If they're heads up operators and they've got the budgets, they can probably make this happen. So I think the OT just has to evolve.
Right, but why can't we think of this industry as being operational technology? Because that's fun. Okay, but we don't use those words. We generally don't use those words. That's kind of what I'm saying.
I'm thinking kind of forward a little bit here, and I see we're in a bit of a pendulum swing here, back towards this hands-on, more information operating the buildings. But if we continue that forward a little bit, let me pose this maybe as a question. Do you guys think we're going to go back to that sentiment of hands off again? Because software will get smarter, AI will help, data will be available, controls will be that much smarter, buildings that much more connected. So we're going to go from install it and then it's automated to, wait, there's an operational component to this whole thing. We got to get smarter connected buildings to, oh, by the way, my system is so good and so smart, you can go back to hands off again.
Problem with that is the broken bits is when it's all working, automation works great. But when an actual piece of it is broken, the refrigeration doesn't start, the boiler doesn't start, somebody has to do something. And then what then you do is you change the operating strategy to basically heal your pain, ever what it is. And if you don't have that connection, or if you are, I guess that's going to have to move into AI, but so it's going to be pretty complicated, because it won't be able to see what is actually, that there's actually water running on the floor, and you can't run that pump anymore. You've got to run that pump over there. It makes no logic to the people watching the scenario, but when you're on site, the greatest experiment, the greatest piece of my life was I basically operated about 10, 15 buildings for about four or 5 years, and it's just a whole different dimension what you have to deal with. Even though you got all this knowledge, it doesn't help when there's water running on the floor.
Are you describing, Tracy, that old joke about the fully automated factory where it's just run by a man and a dog?
Yeah.
And the man's there to feed the dog and the dog's there to tell the man to stop touching stuff.
Yeah, fight the man if he touches the controls, right?
That's right.
Because the people all moved up the food chain to do something more strategic for the organization.
That's the right message, right? Is that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need to be doing that machines can do. And therefore your value as a subject matter expert is further up the equation. How can we do it better? I mean, that if you ask any operator today, they're inundated by their C-suite level folks saying, why aren't we running more efficiently? And his answer is, because my stuff keeps breaking, right? So if you can get to the point where the guy can actually do what he was supposed to be there in the first place, which is, now that it's running, how do I make it run more efficiently? Right.
One of the biggest problems we had
that is operations.
That is operations.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems we had is at operations was what we used to call the tail wagging the dog. And it was the coil that was too small, the pump that was too small. And so we had to run the whole friggin' building in some stupid mode to anybody that was looking at what we were doing. But for survival, we had to, because there was a design problem, or we didn't have enough heat, or we didn't have enough cooling, or all of those problems that were intricate in the design. Basically cutting the tails off the dog, I saved more energy than any other single thing I did.
Well, that's operational knowledge, right, Ken?
Pardon?
That's operational knowledge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I saw a great, a great quote the other day, which was saying, someone asked them, will AI replace my job? And they said, no, someone using AI will replace your job.
So learn to use AI would be the message there.
I
The,
grew up in
Or
a time
anything
when
else.
we
But you
used
still need
energy
that operational
simulation.
knowledge.
Well, the idea of focusing on operations, and sorry for joining late, is that if you do start to gather information about the operational cost, and you have data to be able to evaluate the different facilities you've got, you can do what we did for the state of Missouri 15 years ago, which is advise them to sell the dogs and rent good space, because it was stunning what the dogs were costing them. And so it was like, well, holy cow, I've got 30 million square feet. I can get rid of 10 million square feet of it, rent, and reduce my total cost, because now I have operational data along with capital data all layered together in one decision-making engine. And, no, it wasn't all in one dashboard perfectly. You had to have still multiple screens, but, again, that was 15 years ago before we had the ability to integrate data from different systems. But that, tell me which buildings I should invest in and which buildings I should sell was what Dave Mosby and the governor both, were asking us at the time.
Isn't that what's changing a little bit, Rick, in the fact that leases are getting so much shorter, people are almost renting anyway.
Yeah.
And so, so they're affecting the change and forcing REITs and other people to make sure their building is up to spec, maybe. I don't know.
So
Actually,
with data, though, you can evaluate the total cost for each space. And the weird thing was they had a brand new building that was LEED Platinum, and it was their most expensive building to operate. And they, of course, couldn't get rid of that because there would have been too much egg on everybody's face for having made bad design decisions. One of their most efficient buildings is downtown St. Louis. It was a 120-year-old iconic building. And it was one of the most efficient buildings to operate. So they moved a bunch of people from a 50-year-old building to a 120-year-old building, and they sold the 50-year-old building. And but with data, you can start to actually look at your total operations costs and start to think differently.
I just want to jam one in there. In our 1975 DDC system, when we turned it on, the first thing we discovered is that the chilled water was flowing backwards through several of the buildings. We had a central chilled water plant, and no one could see that, but it was just real obvious. The first thing on the screen was, what is happening? That can't be. As operators, we're all saying, we all said the sensors are wrong. That's not right. Your stupid system doesn't work. It's like, yeah, your stupid system works, but and that's what was happening. From that point on, we were actually able to bring on 2-3 buildings without adding any extra central plant, because we made the central plant work. And we started moving to variable volume and all those kind of good things, and once we could see it, give good operators that data, and the operations will become the lead. There'll be nothing else. New construction will be controlled. New construction needs to be controlled by operations. And
So-
I've actually been in camps where that has been it. The new construction people come to the meeting with us, and utilities comes to the meeting with us to decide how this is going to be done.
Yeah. So Ken, what I'm hearing from you and Rick as well is supporting Jim's position about data transparency. So by having the data and making it transparent, it now becomes possible to affect meaningful change. So my question to you guys is, okay, I agree. Obviously, I agree with the desire for all that, and let's assume more owners choose to pay for that data and the subsequent analysis. To me, I think in many cases though, telling them that they got a problem doesn't mean they'll fix the problem. Because maybe a lack of cash, it's not budgeted. They don't care sufficiently. They're going to sell the building in a while. So how much of what part of me is worried that just because we have the ability to demonstrate opportunity and to fix things before they become major problems doesn't mean the actions will be taken due to intransigence and momentum and politics and all that other stuff, which is what I think we see today. So I just want to throw that out as a topic, really, because we know we can get the data, we know we can analyze it. We did it, very, if you will, crudely back in the 70s, a little bit better in the 90s. Today we're doing it with a lot more pizzazz. But does it change that fundamental dynamic of actually getting the buildings to run better, which is really the goal here, I would think.
It does not without changing the business model. And I think fundamentally, I've always felt since the year 2000, when we delivered our first analytics job, I realized that this was not a products business. So it's all about packaging, Steve, around everything from soup to nuts, from doing the analytics to building value propositions for the owner to execute, to potentially executing those value propositions for owners. And that's what the real estate management, the FM companies are doing now, is they're pairing the technology with solutions and often pairing them with funding sources, such as utility rebates, which so the owner does nothing. So the adoption of analytics has been so poor across the country, and it's so the effects of using it are so positive. We now have utility companies that are just paying us as an analytics company to provide analytics for free to their large customers.
Really?
To try to get that started. That's how bad it's become, because everybody realizes it's phenomenal, but the people do not have any operating budget, and that gets back to Anto's central theme here. If they don't have any operating budget, they can't try these things. You say, okay, well, if most of the things that we're finding, if we can find 20% energy savings on no cost and low cost items, like leaking valves, broken dampers, simultaneous heating and cooling, why wouldn't you just leap at that? I mean, those are faster paybacks than anything else you could do in your business. But but empirically, over the last 25 years, we've determined that they all don't care. They look at the utility bill as a fixed cost and they won't do it. But if you package it and you finance it, you can get some fraction of the people to actually do it. And I think that's the way the business looks. So, but
I'm going to argue with you on that, Jim.
I'm sure. Well, Rick and I are always coming on different sides of the coin, because Rick seems to have the magic touch to get an old-fashioned bid and spec thing to yield money, and I don't.
No, so. You do. Of course, I'm giving you a hard time, but yes, finding the ones that do want to dramatically impact their costs of real estate, right? There are enough of them. And I'm just the optimist on that, because I've got the experience of having done that with enough, senior level people, whether it was a governor or a mayor who said, show me the roadmap for dramatically reducing my total cost. Operations, not just energy, but mostly operations. And in the case of the state of Missouri, they actually did combine. They got rid of this thing called Design and Construction Department, and they put it under Facilities and Maintenance. Right. And so every decision in the state of Missouri was made with the total cost, operational life cycle in mind. And then we took that same model, to a number of other places. And I saw that there was absolutely an appetite for executives to change the way decisions were made. What we didn't have is a decision-making engine. We didn't have interoperability of the systems. So it was too easy for the middle managers to keep their data to themselves and keep their systems to themselves. And then, of course, we were fighting the proprietary big companies as well. But we have a different.
So what is the answer here? Do we need to shoot all the mid-level managers, or can we go high you know, the problem with going high is that, you know, it's the CFO problem, where if we can save 20% of 1% of what they do, it's not relevant to them. So that's, you know, you're fortunate that you were able to go high in state government and these other areas, but frequently you get to this area where it's like, yeah, well, that's great, but you're saving 20% of 1%. I'll see. I got other things to do.
It's a bigger number than that.
In our first EDC system, I was working for the director of energy management for a university, answered directly to the president. And I answered directly to him. Seriously, that was the chain of command. That's why
that was just focused on
that was why
energy.
we were able to do it, is because they took operations and said operations is important. And we will, and operations is never treated as important. And the problem is it's staffed with people from the boiler room. Typically, they've closed down the boiler. So this guy is the chief engineer, so he must know something. And he knows nothing about mechanical systems and stuff. So we had to basically usher those folks out and retrain. Most of the time, we took the boiler engineers tended to be good stock to learn, and we would put computers in front of them. They had all kinds of time while they're watching the gauge on the boiler, and they could actually learn this whole thing. But they had to learn VEV, they had to learn fans, they had to learn all of that stuff. And we found that we had to provide that training. There was no training at that time. It's a little better now, but it's still that good old mechanical information is not easily come by.
Yeah. Who remembers the Honeywell grade book?
Yes. I think it's on my shelf over here.
Mine too. That was the Bible.
Yeah, that was good. That was a good one. But stuff like that was, so if you were a good operator and you tried to pull information, like when we saw things like Jim's analytics, it was like, wow, that is so great. And what Keith was doing back in those days as well. Every time somebody came with a new product that gave us better analytics, we were excited, and we would get money to do it and use the stuff. But I think we lack those people. I don't think there's enough good operators in the world. I don't even think there's very few good operators that I know. Actually, I probably know most of the good operators.
So is that the issue then? That there aren't good operators? That seems to be passing the
It's not an
baton.
identity. I think that's the problem. There's no such like who operates, you know, the boiler room Bob joke that we push back and forth is not a joke. When I would go as a consultant, you should see the variety of people I would meet when I asked who's operating the building. You know, some guy pushing a broom would come up, and you're not operating the building. Like, who's making these decisions?
So in the smarter stack, if we all recall, the top layer is the purpose, which is meant to represent almost like the owner's perspective.
Yeah.
And the second layer underneath that is operations. And so as part of the stack, we recognize the importance of the operation. Maybe what we're saying here is that is a discipline that's not understood enough, and it's not being done well enough, or it's not being serviced with tools or something. Is that what we're saying?
Well, we have CTOs, but the CTO is got a bigger thing. So we need somebody answering to the CTO.
Yeah, the CTO is up on the purpose level, right? We're sort of, what we're talking about is in the operations level, who's actually doing it.
But I'm saying that is the task. So that person, as it was in my thing, three people from the president kind of thing, if I need to be.
My problem is that we have those relationships too, but they're very rare, Ken, where we're that close to the top. In fact, you know, it's this idea that usually we're running into facilities groups that don't know how to ask for money. And one of the things that we thought we would do with the transparency and the analytics is give these people a voice, right? You have been sitting there in the dark trying to run these buildings and these portfolios without the information. Now we can give you that quantitative financial information that we've all been discussing. So that should empower you to go have these discussions. But the problem is that those people typically haven't been able or capable of having those discussions, or the people on the receiving end in finance haven't been willing to listen, right? So I don't want to just continually blame the people that are running the buildings or for their shortfalls, because I think that there are people in finance and other silos of the business that share some culpability here in their inability to change how money is fungible from the construction side to the operating side of the equation.
Yeah, remember, I wanted to remind everyone, different segments in the industry think differently and behave differently, right? In the retail side of things where we see a lot of what I would say unsophisticated real estate owners that may have a dozen or 30 or 40 buildings, but they're all small. There are no CTOs, there are no energy managers, there's no middle management at all, hardly. And it is not everybody, but it's not uncommon for a customer of ours to get frustrated because our system has the ability to find the problems, but they have no budget to fix the problems.
Right. That's what I
And
was saying earlier.
yeah, and it's really kind of a catch-22. You need to have the right understanding and mentality from a leadership financial standpoint, as well as, you know, the systems and know that they can help. But it's a real challenge in the smaller building market, and there are a whole lot more smaller buildings than there are bigger buildings, right?
So, Anno, you are now in the FM industry, right? Which obviously touches on this. Do you see this sort of operations thing as being something that an FM provider should be doing, or how does that?
Yeah,
how do you fit into all of that?
Key to our business at the end of the day. I mean, that's all we do, right? Is provide operations. It's all about operations. I mean, CBRE sells people, right? So yeah, operations is the central part of everything that we do, and recognizing it ties into sustainability and, you know, other initiatives that go along with that equation. And it's actually an interesting subject. In fact, I was talking about this very thing this morning with someone else, in that, interestingly enough, I think the CRE industry has made I wouldn't say a 180-degree turn, but has made a significant shift to technology in helping in operations, right? In that for a long time, you were selling a lot of, you know, resources, people, bodies to do the work. And now I think there's not recently, you know, the last 5+ years, right? There's been a significant turn to how do we use technology to really make that much more efficient, effective, faster, better, you know, recognizing challenges we've been talking about with resources.
Do you think that falls under FM, or, I mean, I'm not sure it falls under BAS. To making the operation efficient, like you described, where does that fit?
Yeah, but that depends on terminology in the industry. In our industry, the terminology is FM, right? Facility management. But facility management is a wide term in the industry, right? I mean, you could argue mowing the lawns is facility management.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you think, Anno, that facility management incorporates all of the different OT systems that I referred to earlier?
Yeah.
Access, video, building automation, etc.
In the concept of what we as my company would call facility management. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
When they subcontract out, I know the stuff that they feel is risky, like the fire and the security.
Yeah.
Will they subcontract out the BAS, or will they just do more breakdowns?
Sometimes it depends on the client a little bit, right? But yeah, we do a lot of the BAS FM, and a lot of our folks do that work.
But I mean, in truth, BAS has the opportunity to make the FM more efficient operationally, by sending, with the information it has and the analytics and the things that if there is a problem reported or even, sees a problem maybe coming up, at least they can send, the right guy to go to site once to fix it rather than 3 times before they do it. So operationally, they become more efficient by the knowledge that the BAS can provide them with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, as Tracy said, that's industry specific, right? We do a lot of retail as well, and retail fits exactly like Tracy said.
It occurred to me as we were talking about all this, years ago, I was more aware and cognizant of a magazine called Building Operating Management, BOM, and I put something in the text here that never comes up nowadays, or hasn't come up for me for 20 years. And yet in their name of their magazine is operating, right? So it almost feels like we should invite them into to this discussion to see what they're thinking, because they are in touch with building owners and probably some FM companies as well. And just a thought, guys, to consider. Maybe we can talk more about it on Wednesday night.
I think my maybe naive perspective of this is that over the decades, I've gone to BOMA shows and IFMA shows and other facility management shows and got a little bit bored after seeing rows and rows of rooms and janitorial equipment and stuff like that. Right. So
and that's the point, right? Anto, is FM is a wide terminology.
exactly. Yeah.
Right. So
I think there's a problem that the whole operation industry has been downplayed and is not, like, all of my major successes probably came from beating up arrogant engineers who actually thought their designs worked and taking them to task. And there was some bloody fights, and I had support, and I was, had to prove them wrong, that their design does not work. It does not have, and analytics was my tool to do that. But coming from a computer simulation background and working with a control company, I had a few more tools than a lot of people, and kind of an abrasive kind of guy. So don't tell me I'm wrong, especially when I've got the data to prove it. And so I would actually use analytics to prove to them that no, you don't have enough coil capacity, or yes. And they actually, most of them had no earthly idea what I was talking about and walked away from it. The other thing is we have a problem that mechanical design engineers do not go out to the project. They'd come out to the mechanical room and they couldn't identify the pieces they'd put on the drawing.
Wow.
Unbelievable. They basically copied that stuff from some templates. So we have this whole design thing. The whole consulting thing is broken. The consultants grow up. You have this guy that's this brain consultant comes up with these amazing designs that actually work. He keeps growing and growing and growing, and then he gets up and he splits off and starts his own consulting company. And all that information is lost from the main consulting company. He starts up and the whole pattern keeps repeating itself. So we have this, just a whole bunch of designs that are very frustrating to try and operate. And to operate that stuff, you need to squish egos, and it's tough fighting. It's a lot of the stuff you're doing has little to do with mechanical design and operations. It's basically just trying to cut the tails off those dogs and wagging tails off the dogs and trying to make all that stuff run. And then serious things. I mean, I'm talking about a 1 million gallon chilled water tank that never worked until we actually got involved in it. Thermoclines and stuff like that. It's they can write the words, but until we actually put sensors in to actually measure the thermocline, we had no idea. Again, it wasn't working the way it was designed. And of course, variable volume became a part of it. The redesign, the over pumping in buildings is just unbelievable from an energy point of view and from a performance point of view. So trying to straighten out all of that stuff, you have to understand, you have to basically do a dynamic design of what is doing, pulling back the information from the analytics. The problem is the analytics, there's few people who can actually do that. I walk in both those camps. And in addition to that, if you do have those people, they have to have the support of management to take their designers to task, and that's what Rick was talking about is there's buildings you can't touch. I mean, you go in and they say, no, you can't. You know, the architect will go berserk if we do anything in there. So we actually go
So
in guerrilla warfare, do stuff. Sorry.
We're out of time. So we're gonna bring this to a wrap. Thank you. Thanks very much, Ken. I think that's a great narrative on that. Clearly we picked an interesting enough topic to take us for the rest of February. So we'll think on that in the next few days, and we'll come back next week and continue this conversation.
All right,
Okay.
very good.
Thanks all.
See you guys.
Adios, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.